Hey guys, it is Mr. Dave with the Ray Kitty Creation Workshop, and thank you for joining us here on the Ray Kitty Science Project. We've got some fun science we're going to do today. We're going to be working with heat. We've talked about heat a little bit in some of our previous episodes, and we're going to demonstrate a little bit and visualize a little bit of some of the things that heat can do. We've got some materials with us here today. Most of the things that I'm doing today are kind of things that you'll more watch than participate in, but there is something that if you do want to add to your Ray Kitty Science kit, we do have these thermoplastic beads, okay? Thermoplastic beads. Now, you can purchase those at your local craft store or online. They're very inexpensive, and there is a lot of really fun stuff you can do with those. So those are called thermoplastic beads, okay? The other materials that we will be using today are gallium, and we have our little thermal imaging camera here that we're going to be showing a little bit of what's going on as far as the heat and the heat transfer in these objects. So, as a little review, what is heat? Okay, heat is when the molecules become energized and start moving a little bit faster. Okay, if you look back through our episodes, you'll see the little model that we had of the molecules being very still when they're colder, and as they heat up, they begin to move around faster and they have more energy because heat is energy. Okay, so you can transfer heat, but you can't transfer cold. Okay, cold is actually heat moving away from something is how you cool it down. So you can transfer heat. Now, before we get too deep into some of our other stuff, I'm going to start with our little thermoplastic beads here, okay? And I'm going to get those kind of warming up. So what I have here is I have some water. Now, if you are doing these thermoplastic beads at home, make sure that you have an adult with you because you do have to use hot water. Now, you can see I'm touching this to kind of demonstrate you don't need boiling hot water, but you do need water hot enough. They recommend about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so that's water that's hot to the touch. You don't want to spill it on you. Make sure you have an adult anytime you're using something above room temperature, anytime you have that heat, okay? So our thermoplastic beads here, they're little bitty beads, just little tiny balls of plastic. Now, they call this thermoplastic because it has a very low melting point, okay? And we're going to demonstrate that again with our gallium in a moment here, but these little bitty beads have a very low melting point, okay? So you can see they're just little tiny plastic beads, and what we're going to do is we're going to take those beads and we are going to pour them into our hot water, okay? Now, we're doing this ahead of time, and we'll get into some of our other concepts while this is in here, but you may notice already those beads starting to change, okay? They're going from that dark white, but that solid white color to a nice crystal clear color here. You can see this happening in this hot water, okay? So we're going to set that down for just a second. Let those beads warm up. They're going to be, I'm going to scooch them to the side just a little bit. But those beads are going to be warming up, and we're going to be doing some fun stuff with these beads in just a second. Now, we're going to get to our camera next, okay, so we can kind of be explaining some of these concepts. What I have here is a thermal imaging camera, okay? Now, what this little guy can see is different than what we see. Okay, this actually sees a lot like a vampire bat would see, okay, which is an interesting concept. If you look up vampire bats, I'm a New Mexican, so this is a fun little concept about the vampire bats. Now, if you look on our image there, you can see some of our awesome folks working the camera over there. Hello, yeah, and you can see the heat as the electrical equipment radiates heat. But you can see a lot of things on this camera here. We'll kind of glance around the studio a little bit. And then you come over here and you see our thermoplastic beads. Now, that bright yellow color means that it's very hot, okay? And so the brighter colors on this camera are actually going to be the brighter or the hotter colors or the items that are radiating more heat, okay? So what we're going to do on this camera here is I am going to put my face on the camera. There is my face. Now you can see that my hair does not show up very well on the camera, but that's because it doesn't show up very well on the other camera either. But the hair on my face here, you can see is a little bit darker. Okay, so we've got that darker hair on my face. You can see around my hands there that there are darker parts on my knuckles. Now, I have some ice here, and what we're going to do, you can kind of be watching on the camera or watching what I'm doing here, but I have some ice, so I'm going to take this ice, okay? If you look on the camera and you're looking at my bald head, okay? You're looking at my bald head on the camera. Now, I put my hand on the ice, so I got my hand nice and cold, and I am going to put my hand on my head, okay? Now, when I take it off, you can see that that Mad Max handprint there on the top of my head that is nice and cold, right? So that cold from my hand is staying on my head. Now you can see that my ears here are that nice dark blue. Now when I put my hands on that ice pack and I show them to the camera, it's almost black. Okay, and that is because we have a very low temperature where it had been on that ice, okay? Now, another fun thing to kind of note with your face here on this camera is that as you're looking at my face on the camera, you'll notice that my nose is cold, okay? Normally on humans, you don't have a whole lot of blood flow to that nose there, so it's cold, just like your ear, okay? And if you'll notice something, look in my nostrils. Now, normally if somebody says, hey, look in my nostrils, tell them no. But this time, let's check it out. What happens when I inhale? Did you see my nostrils get dark? And then as I exhale. Yeah, all that nice hot breath there. Now, this camera is sensitive enough that it can notice those changes in temperature by the air moving. So that air moving around has shown on this camera that my face has hotter spots and cooler spots, okay? So this thermal imaging camera, I'm just gonna have it kind of sitting there to the side. We will show some of these things on there. These are those beads, okay, that are nice and hot in there. And I've got another material. Well, let's go ahead and do those beads first, and then we'll move over to the other material because our beads are ready, so we may as well. Now, I'm going to move this camera here just so where you can kind of see what's going on with our beads as we're doing it. And I'll use this as my little sandbag there. There you go. And I'm going to pull these beads out, and we're going to see what has happened with our little thermoplastic beads. Now, as I said, these things are a lot of fun. There is a lot that you can do with them. We at the Ray Kitty household, we do some cosplay and those kind of things, and these are great for that because I'm going to pour the water out. Okay, I'll bring my little bucket over here. You can see on the camera that at the bottom of my bucket, there is cold. That's because there's ice in this bucket, right? So you can see that nice cold bottom of the bucket. So I'm going to pour the hot water into the bucket, okay? And as I do, when you see on that camera there, you can see where that water is touching the bucket and heating up the bucket, right? So we have that hot spot happening on that bucket there, and you'll actually be able to watch that cool as it's sitting there. Now, these little plastic beads, this thermoplastic is some fun stuff because you can mold it, you can build with it. As I said, we use it in making costumes, but you can use it in making all kinds of different creations with this thermoplastic. So now I've got this little ball of goop here, and I will put it in front of the camera. We'll see that it's pretty warm, but it's getting cooler on some of the outside spots there. But this, even though it's nice and clear, okay, I can see through it here, right? When I'm looking at the camera, I can see through this stuff, even though it's clear. But when we pull it up to the camera, you'll notice that even though we can see through it, the camera sees nothing but the heat, right? So it blocks off all of the rays or of the waves that are on our visual level and gives us that nice heat, okay? So Here's our bucket cooling down again. So this thermoplastic, you can mold it. This is the fun stuff to do at home. If you have little molds, they can be cookie cutters, they can be molds for making resin or different things like that. And you can press this stuff into the molds and you can make pretty much all kinds of fun stuff with this. So what we have here is as it's beginning to cool, it's beginning to solidify. So I'm going to bring it back in front of our little camera here. And we can see as I'm stretching it out here that it is beginning to cool. Okay, it's changing from that nice bright yellow and that color is darkening into those oranges. Now, when this is cooled, when it is finally set, you do have a back to that white color, and we're seeing this here. Now, if I were to set this on our ice pack, okay, I've got our little ice pack here. So I set this on our ice pack and I pick it up. You're going to notice that you've got those cold spots, but they are going to start warming up. Now, that was what I was talking about, the transfer of heat, okay? Now, this ice pack is cold, right? Because that's what it's for. Now, this is an ice pack / hot pack, but right now we're using it as an ice pack. It is frozen. But when I put this on here, it doesn't transfer the cold from our ice pack to our plastic. Okay, that's very important in thermodynamics. You can't transfer cold from one thing to another. It never happens. Okay, but what you can do is you can suck the heat out of something, right? You can move the heat from something to the ice pack. So in order for this ice to be able to cool my plastic, it actually has to absorb some of that heat. And you can see that it's absorbed a lot of that heat there. And this side here that I had on the ice pack is nice and cool. We flip it over and we have a lot of heat on that other side still. Okay, so even though we put it on that ice pack, that's why like my brain wasn't frozen when I put my cold hand on there, is because we've transferred it from the surface first, because this is not a very conductive material. Now, conductive means that it is easily, or it has an easy time transferring energy. Okay, plastic is not very conductive. And so conductive can be electricity energy, it can be heat energy. In this case, we're using heat energy. Our plastic is not very conductive, so that's why it can have one very cold side and then one warm side. Okay, so this is our thermoplastic. Now, I should have been making something fun with it instead of smashing it on the the little ice pack there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some water here. Let me show you something with the water while I have it. We've got our water here. This is my little bottle of water. You can see it's about room temperature. If you look at the walls and things, they're pretty close to that room temperature. Now, what happens when I spray a little mist? Okay. Oh, look at how it looks like everything cools down, right? Everything starts to cool down, and that is because that mist, again, we're from New Mexico. We have those swamp coolers, we call them here, or evaporative coolers. Those evaporative coolers actually have that moisture. The moisture works just like that heat transfer we were talking about in absorbing that heat, and it cools us down. So we can use that like that in our homes to keep our houses cool. So I'm going to put some more of this water in here, and I'm going to put it back on my little heat tray over here, so I can remelt some of our plastic. So I'm going to warm this water up. Okay. Remember, anytime you are using something, in this case, I do have glass on that, but this is glass that can withstand those temperature changes. Okay. So if you do have something that is hot, make sure that you have a parent or somebody with you that is accustomed to those kind of things and the safety that's required there. So I'm going to take this. I will put it just halfway in here, and we'll kind of check on that in just a few minutes. Okay? So we saw with our thermal camera what was happening there. We can see as our water is conducting, it is starting to heat that up there. Our tray is plenty warm. Now, it's not too hot, but it is warm. You can see the little hot areas on there. Okay, so What we'll do now is I am going to switch to something else that is a fun little thing to experiment with. This is something that you can find online if you are looking around. It's kind of expensive for as much as you are getting, but there is a lot of fun things you can do with it. This is actually a metal. Okay, in these little syringes, I have a metal. Okay, now it looks like maybe a liquid while it's in that syringe. This metal that's in here is called gallium. Okay, now gallium has some really fun properties, and one of them is that at room temperature, right, at about 86 degrees, gallium is a liquid. Okay, so it's actually a liquid at room temperature. Okay, so I'm going to put this at a little bit of an angle there so you can see. So what I'm going to do with this metal, this is actually a metal, is I'm going to squirt it out of my syringe. So I'm going to take my syringe and I'm actually squirting drops of this metal out, and they are rolling down my plate here, and it is liquid metal. Okay, so if you yeah, this probably won't chase you and then stab the trunk of your car or anything like that. But this is that liquid metal, and it's safe to touch. Okay, gallium is safe to touch. If you are working with it, I do ask that when you're done, wash your hands. Okay, you're going to notice as I'm working with it, and you'll see little bitty streaks here on my tablecloth, that gallium leaves a residue behind. It's almost like another metal that you have in pencils called graphite. Ah, there you go. The graphite leaves that black stripe on there. This gallium actually leaves a little bit of that metal on your hands, and it will leave a little bit of that residue on your hand. Now, you can see it kind of rolling around in my hand. Now, this gallium is still very cold. Okay, I played with it earlier, and I was trying to get it down to a solid again, but it takes a lot to get it back down to a solid. Now, even though it melts quite easily, it takes a lot to get to a solid because it is not a very strong conductor. It's metal, right? We talked about that conductivity with plastic. Gallium is a metal, but it actually is not even as good of a conductor as lead. So as far as metals go, this gallium is not very conductive. Okay. Now, if you look on my hands, you will see lots of sparkles there. There's also water. When you are moving the gallium around, it's a lot easier to work with it if you have some water with it. So the wet parts on my hand are actually water. But then you see that little sparkle and that gray on there. I have got lots of rags here available because anytime you are playing with this gallium, you will have that residue on you. Okay, but it is relatively safe as long as you're not ingesting it. So when you're done, make sure you wash your hands. Now, to get this back down to a solid state, I would have to have it in a cold or a lower temperature for a pretty long while. I had this in my fridge for maybe an hour, and we still didn't form those crystals on it because it will form a crystalline structure before it becomes solid. If you look, you can see, if you look closely, I can't really get the angle too much there, but you may be able to look right across the top, and you'll see that it is starting to get that crystalline structure on the top of it there. Okay, it'll form crystals, and those crystals will continue on until it becomes fully solid. Okay, but as I said, that's gonna take a while with this stuff here. But when I have it here, you can see as far as cleanup, I'm just wiping it off of my hands. If I were to rate this one on cleanup, I would say it's probably a 3 out of 5 as far as easy to clean up. So you do want to kind of be mindful of what you're getting it on. You see that little gray residue there. This gallium is a lot of fun, and there is a lot of fun things you can do with it. You can pour it into a mold, put it in that mold, leave it for a good while, and it will form into a solid again. When you're playing with it with your hands, it's got a very strange kind of sensation to it because it acts like a very, very viscous, but a very not viscous liquid all at the same time. So there's some very strange sensations to playing with it. But you'll notice here, when I get the nice thin layers of that gallium, okay, where it's nice and thin. This plate here, beforehand, I got this plate nice and cold, so this plate would go ahead and freeze it, but this is beginning to solidify. So our gallium is beginning to become a solid again, and it is solid metal because it has dropped below that 86 degrees. So our metal did drop below that 86, and we are getting this nice kind of pattern that looks like Earth from space or some kind of thing like that. Now, when you watch this, the solid gallium, okay, because the way those molecules are aligned, that solid gallium wants to gather or collect the liquid gallium. Okay, so it wants to bond to it. That's what keeps it, even though it is in that liquid form. That's why it has such a strong surface tension. We'll do a whole bunch on surface tension later, but that's why it has a strong surface tension. We get that nice rounded shape on it as it's moving around, is because it really wants to bond. Now we saw how this was already solid, but once that liquid comes into contact with it, then we start to get that liquefaction, and then on the adverse, we are getting our solidification. So it starts to bond with itself and turn into the other. Okay, so whether it's with a solid or with a liquid, it's going to want to be with its friends. Okay, it wants to just be like everything else around it. So this gallium, even though it is molten metal, it is melted metal, we can look at it with our thermal vision here and see that even though this is a melted metal, it's not very warm, right? We have some almost black spots there. And then in contrast, we have some warmer spots, and that is where it would come in contact with my hand. Okay, so we do have some warmer spots on that gallium, but we can see that that stuff is very cool for being a molten or liquefied metal. Okay, so this is a liquefied metal. All right, so we'll see over here if our plastics have started with the remelting. And yep, we've got some nice gooey yuck on the bottom here. You can see it on our camera there, on our thermal imaging, that we have started to liquefy some of this plastic here. So the fun thing that I was going to show you about that is you heat it back up and you can use it again. So this, once you get these beads here, even when you've turned them into something, you can throw them right back into that warm water, and you can remelt and you can replay with these again. So you'll notice the lack of that heat exchange, because we have this one here, our molten stuff is pretty warm. This stuff here, not as warm. We have some dark spots there that are from that cooling, and so that conductivity, right, has shown that it really does not conduct it very fast or very easily. Okay, so what we have here as far as materials today we have our gallium. Okay, our gallium, as I said, is something that's a little harder to get a hold of, and it is more difficult to store. There are things that you have to take into account when you are storing gallium. Gallium reacts strongly with aluminum, so you can make some fun sculptures with that, but make sure you have someone who kind of understands some of those chemical properties and things before you do that. We have our thermoplastic beads, and we have our camera here, which is our thermal imaging camera. Now this camera here, again, is something you can purchase. They're kind of pricey, and be careful if you're shopping for thermal cameras on the internet or that app on your phone that says it's a thermal camera. They're really not. They're filters for your camera. But we've proven that this one is not a filter. This one is the actual camera, okay? So that's all we've got as far as heat today. Remember, heat can transfer from something to something, but you can't transfer cold, okay? All right, so that is it for our science today. Thank you. I am Mr. Dave with the Ray Kitty Creation Workshop. You can check us out at raykitty.com. We do have a lot of kind of things that we're starting to build there, and you'll be able to check these out on the TV and on the website, and we'll have all the information there. All right, thank you. And you are watching the Ray Kitty Science Project. And remember, science shows you matter. I lost track of time at the end. I don't know where I was at.